I'm going to say hi and welcome to the Adversity Psychologist Podcast. I'm Dr. Tara Quintarillo. I'm really excited today because I have a guest who is also a colleague of a former guest as well. So I have Beth Derry with me today. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what's brought you on today.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for having me here. So I am Beth Derry. I am the founder of a company called Lovely Messy Humans, all about educating people about the science of being human, especially around things like emotional regulation, resilience, and healing. And I'm particularly focusing as well on this topic of teenage self-harm, which we're going to be talking about today. Yeah, because it's all connected.
I absolutely love that name when we first kind of were putting in touch with each other. Lovely Messy Humans. Where did that come from?
That is a story in itself. So I had not come up with a name for this work, and I was talking to teenagers who are struggling with their mental health, particularly around self-harm. They had told me that the information that they've been given that has made them feel worse and even want to self-harm. Yes. So as I developed the work I'm doing, I did it with them and I kept checking in. And so I came up with a couple of names, which they didn't like at all. And when I landed on this one, Lovely Messy Humans, they loved it. So it kind of reflects the ethos of how I'm talking about some of these difficult topics. They are relevant to absolutely everyone, and they are about who we are as humans and our biology. And
for me, there's a lot of compassion in that name. We are all lovely. We have things about us. Life throws things at us, doesn't it? Hence the kind of name of this podcast. And off the back of the pandemic, particularly, so I'm a mum of a teenage boy, soon to be teenager as well. And off the back of the pandemic, I know in my local area here in Horsham, we've had massive increase in self-harm being reported in teenagers, schools, not knowing what to do about that, parents not knowing what to do about it, how to have conversations. So it's something I don't think that's talked about enough. And we were just talking about this off camera, weren't we? That, I think a lot of people are kind of talking about how we refer people in kind of treatment, but not enough conversations about what is self-harm? How does it show up? How do we maybe start to have a conversation if we notice it? So shall we let's dive right in. Yeah. Where do we start? So if somebody's brand new to this word, or they've heard it floated around, but they don't really know what it is, how do we start to deconstruct what self-harm is?
Well, actually, I think probably it's useful to also start on how common this is, because you've just mentioned this, how much it's coming up. The data on this topic is so out of date. It's really hard to find accurate data. So there's a study by UCL from 2019 that found that 24% of 17-year-olds said that they had self-harm. They reported having self-harm. So 24% of 17-year-olds, but that was back in 2019. And you're right,
so pre-pandemic,
and social media, it's gone up so much. And as I've started to do this work, I am getting an awful lot of people get in touch, schools, youth organizations, everyone's grappling with it. I've seen it called the new eating disorder. So eating disorders are relatively well understood now. That doesn't mean they're easily solved, but they're well understood. Whereas self-harm, there is so much fear and confusion and anger as well, and shame.
Yes.
And where I'm coming from, I actually self-harmed when I was at university, so well over 25 years ago. I can't remember exactly what that time scale is now, but
similar.
The situation hasn't got better, it's got way worse. And the understanding of mental health has got way better, but why hasn't this topic got any better? So that's why I felt a responsibility in a way. I've done so much work myself to become happy, healthy. I've worked in communications my entire life around sustainability. So talking about complex issues, I feel like I've got a bit of a responsibility to use some of that experience. And actually, in order to start talking about self-harm, I went back and looked at really, why did I do that? What was going on for me? So in terms of what it is, self-harm it's quite broad. It can be a broad topic. when I'm talking about it, I'm particularly focusing on when someone intentionally harms themselves.
Yes.
That can broaden out to risky behaviours and all sorts of other ways that we harm ourselves. But this idea of intentionally injuring ourselves, and there are a multitude of ways that people do that. It's a sensitive topic, so if anyone's going to be triggered by this, just be prepared. But some of the ways, cutting is the most common. But there's also, it says, scratching, hair pulling, burning, and actually young people are becoming more and more creative as they talk about it, and as it's become more common. I've had teenagers telling me of new ways that they are finding to do this. I'm not going to talk about them now, but yeah.
So as the kind of digital world expands, so does access to knowledge, but also then, that's interesting, the sharing of the knowledge between communities, which we know can be problematic as well.
Yeah. And it is more common among girls than boys.
Yes. Yeah.
Quite a lot more common. But within the groups of young people who are self-harming, I'm seeing quite distinct groups, and there are distinct reasons why people do it. And that's quite relevant for the difference between boys and girls, I think, because there's definitely much more self-harm going on among girls for this need to belong and this need to be part of the group, which is a core human need. So I do not dismiss that at all. We could talk about that in a while. But just to touch on that, it's more common among girls. It is definitely happening with boys, and the boys are self-harming when they're really suffering.
So, that in terms of, so that's what's really interesting, because when we kind of talk about, well, how do you start to have a conversation? It's important for people to maybe realise ways that people might be self-harming, because there is still that kind of stereotypical view. You still see it in teleprograms, movies, that it's cutting, and it's cutting that we might be able to see, as a parent or a caregiver, school teacher, whatever. But it's not that simple, is it? There's lots of kind of hidden ways. And it is really, as you say, it's a really difficult topic, because we want to be careful not to talk too much about the ways people do it, because obviously we need to be careful around risk, but at the same time giving people enough to maybe begin to ask questions around that. But also there could be behavioural changes and other things around the self-harm, can't there, that might be indicators that might help people to know whether to start a conversation as well.
So what's interesting is that some young people, when they self-harm, they want it to be seen. It's a bid for connection, which is important. We need connection. That is another core human need. And if we're not feeling seen or heard, and those needs are not being met, then that's self-harm may be a bid to, that classic term, a cry for help. And for others, they will hide it, and then you're looking for being withdrawn, long sleeves in the summer, not wanting to show skin. So I've had quite a lot of dance teachers want to understand it, because often it's people like that are first to see the signs. Those who are hiding it, I tend to think that's where the emotional suffering that's driving them to do it is what needs the attention. And we can talk about that, actually, how self-harm, it regulates emotions. We can look at some of the science of that. It's really important to understand.
Well, I think that's, so important. Because I guess one of the things as well, if people are kind of trying to understand what is it in terms of what it looks like or signs, but also trying to understand the reasons behind it, or the formulation, as we'd say as psychologists, behind it, can also perhaps help you further spot signs. So it's interesting, you're kind of talking about things like withdrawal, as well as a kind of overt logistical things, long sleeves in the summer. I don't know, some families have very kind of open policies on people running from the bathroom to their bedroom, but if you notice changes in that behaviour, or really simple things that you might indicate just changes in behaviour. Sometimes we have kind of this innate, I call it hairs on the back of the neck, when you kind of notice that your child's changing, their behaviour's changing. Which can happen with teenagers anyway, can't it? But it's important to be looking within that.
Parents are telling me that they see their young person come home from school stressed and upset about how the day's gone, disappear into their bedroom and come out a different child, calm, and then they know that they've self-harmed.
Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. So a large part of what I am training people about self-harm, but a large part of that training is about how our nervous system works and how emotional regulation works. And that's relevant to everyone. And it's a life-changing thing to understand, because it has a huge, powerful impact over our life and our behavior. But we all know what it feels like to be stressed and triggered, don't we? To have all those stress hormones racing around our bodies is not a nice feeling. And we will do whatever we can to calm ourselves down. And for adults, that might be have a glass of wine or, a multitude of ways. Young people have found something that's working for them, which is to self-harm. And something that's not talked about enough, which it's a bit of a light bulb moment for a lot of people to understand. Self-harm is a survival strategy. So it's a strategy to either regulate emotions or meet an unmet need. It's not a suicide attempt. And
that's important to
it's
to
really
bring in.
important.
Glad you did. Yeah.
So our nervous system is amazingly intelligent. It's there to help us survive. That's all it really cares about. It doesn't care about how our relationships are doing and whether we're happy, as long as we are going to survive. So that's where these reactions come. All of the stress hormones are released, and when we injure ourselves by accident, our nervous system releases all sorts of neurochemicals, one of which is endorphins. And endorphins are a natural pain reliever. So when a young person is self-harming, that's what they're doing. They're giving themselves some endorphins, which calms down. And I know what that feels like, having been there. It works, and it doesn't last very long. So it's instant relief. You feel calm for 15 to 20 minutes, and that's how long it lasts. And then you're left with all of the consequences of that: the pain, the shame, the having to hide what you've done, potentially the scarring. That's one of the things I talk a lot about with parents. If there's something you can do, one thing you can do, don't try and instantly stop your young person self-harming, but try to avoid them having to live with scars for the rest of their life. Those are the sorts of conversations that need to be happening.
Tricky ones, but
it's
much
really
needed.
very tricky. But that endorphin effect needs to be far better understood, because that's what is being tapped into here.
And what we know about humans is, even if something's a quick fix, there's that short window, we are likely to do it again. Because I know sometimes in my clinic or various other points in my career, you might get people ask you, but if you know then that you're going to have scars and pain afterwards, why then do it again and again? Why the repeating patterns? But just helping people therefore understand why it is that we will go back to that thing that we know we get the instant relief, even if it's just a short-term thing.
And endorphins aren't addictive in the same way that alcohol or something would be, but it's the experience is addictive because it helps. It really helps.
As you say, just sometimes something as simple as getting in from school, going up those stairs to the bedroom, the brain will already be kind of going, this is associated with relief, no matter how temporary that relief is. So that's all kind of part of it as well. Because I know sometimes when people have, reported to me, they've tried to have conversations with a young person, there can sometimes kind of be but why do you do it? Because look at the outcome and look at this. And actually that's not helpful, although it might be logical as a caregiver. But it's so important. I'm so glad we've had you on today to try and kind of dispel some of this stuff, to help people know how to then have the right kind of conversations.
And that very first conversation is so critical. So when an adult, whoever that adult is, whether it's the parent or someone else, first discovers that a young person is self-harming, that is that young person's first experience of someone knowing, and it can can go so wrong if you're not careful. So
that's important to say.
It can. I've had stories of people being told, show me what you've done in front of everyone, or
oh my goodness,
it's been spotted in front of a whole class of pupils, and so there's enough shame already and confusion that comes with self-harm because people don't understand why they're doing it. They feel like there's something wrong with them. Let's not add to it. So the advice I give on how to start that conversation, it's to be very gentle, but be direct. So don't avoid it, which is easily done if you're
when we panic, when we're stressed,
exactly.
we might not know what to do. Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. Don't demand detail. So really avoid that kind of demanding.
Okay.
Be aware of your tone of voice.
Yeah.
So it's about sitting down and respecting their boundaries as well. They may not be ready to talk about it right now. Teenagers need those boundaries and they really need their privacy. So it's about getting that balance right between being gentle and curious and supportive compared to full on. And especially for a parent, if you've just discovered that your child is self-harming, this isn't easy. I absolutely acknowledge that. You yourself will be being triggered. It's upsetting and it's confusing. So it might be worth just stepping back. And I also say focus on the immediate need, not trying to solve it. So what do they need right now? Is it some first aid
That's
stuff?
a really good point, isn't it? Yeah.
Is it a movie? Is it, one step at a time? And
then we don't need to quick fix, problem solve, get it. Because again, that's kind of part of threat mode, isn't it? Let's get it sorted. We can't have this. And noticing as a caregiver, parent, your brain might be fast forwarding to all sorts of things. Just because our nervous system might also then be dysregulated because of what we've discovered.
Yeah, and co-regulation is huge. Our nervous systems are not separate, they're connected. So our own emotional state, I think it's one of the most powerful things that we can do to support young people is to be calm ourselves. That rubs off, but the opposite is also true. So yes, so I also give people advice on exactly the words to use. Don't ask the young person why they're doing it, or they don't know. I didn't know at the time. It's not that simple. But acknowledge that they're clearly struggling. There's something going on and that you want to help, but it's going to take time.
Yes.
It's not a quick fix. So they won't be able to stop overnight. And actually, I think it can do harm by demanding that they do, because understanding that it's actually helping to calm them down. If you take that away, does that make sense? This is
absolutely. I think that's really powerful for people to know, because there might be this kind of instant, again, people's kind of understanding of kind of risk and risk assessment. And, again, that, if you're a teacher, somebody who's in more professional capacity, youth group leader or whatever, there may be kind of issues there around trying to prevent or stop it for risk reasons. But I think these are really important conversations.
So schools and organisations, of course, have their own procedures and they must follow them. And those are different. And it's very different for a parent compared to someone working in an organisation like that. But that first opportunity, I always say, let it open the door and do it in a way that leaves the door open so that they can come back.
That kind of providing that safe space. But almost I want to win it just for both of you as well, because by kind of just saying, okay, here's something, not rushing into that threat mode, panic mode, problem solving, I think is very refreshing. But just noticing as well that we might have that bit of our brain that might go, I need to problem solve. It's hard, especially when you're a parent trying to pull around your own stuff. This is your child. This is your child that you've nurtured and to discover. And sometimes, again, I don't know whether that's something you're comfortable talking about, is the kind of stuff around how you might discover it. It may be something you've noticed little bits over time and it's made you have a conversation, or it may be that, I don't know, do parents ever discover items in a bedroom that might indicate a child? It could be a very acute way that you discover, a very maybe more traumatic way of discovering it, or a school phoning up. I don't know whether that's important.
The one I hear most is that they notice the injuries, which is, of course, a huge shock. Or a school will, and they will phone up. Or, like I said, the dance teacher. But some young people will hide it as much as they can. I talk about this whole process that's going on behind. So those who are hiding it, they are stuck in this cycle. It is a cycle of self-harm.
And that's important for people to know as well, isn't it?
It really is. But there's opportunities at every stage of that cycle. So the way I describe it, it always begins with a thought or a belief, or perhaps an earlier experience of trauma, something that is causing that young person to have their nervous system triggered, that big stress response, potentially dysregulated. Neurodiversity is huge in here as well.
Yes.
The conversations I'm having with parents, I would say the majority have young people who are neurodiverse, who are trying to fit into a system that's very difficult for them. And they've found a way to help themselves feel better. And it makes sense, doesn't it? So it all starts with this challenging situation, thoughts about themselves, beliefs about themselves, friendship issues, whatever it is, needs not being met. That then triggers the nervous system. That floods the body with stress hormones. So you get this sense of suffering, emotional suffering, and that mind-body stress response. The self-harm then calms that down.
Yes.
In briefly, that's the problem. And then it feeds back right back to the beginning, because then you're left with that shame, confusion, feeling like there's something wrong with you. So it's a cycle. And then, but that also means there are things that can be done at every stage, whether it's looking at those initial thoughts and beliefs and working on those probably with professional help, whether it's changing the environment that's causing that to happen. I think educating young people about how the nervous system works. I mean, educating ourselves as adults. For me, this has been completely life-changing to understand how my nervous system works and to see what's going on in the moment. And then I know what to do about it.
How empowering that is. It is quite mind-blowing that kids aren't taught this stuff in schools.
Yeah. Well, we're taught about it in a biology lesson, aren't we? But we're not taught about it in terms of the human experience.
Yeah, which could pave the way for our adult life.
Yes, because there are a lot of tools that we can use for emotional regulation that calm us down, that are not self-harm. So that's why this understanding is so important, because it points to the solutions.
Yes, and hope, that's the word that came to mind for me then. That part of what we do as psychologists is a lot of psychoeducation work with the people that we work with. So it's not about going straight into fixing it and certain strategies, because if you don't understand what's happening in your own mind and your body, the relationship between the two, but then how that leads to behavioural responses, you're not in a position to be able to catch it in the best. It's always kind of fixing it. Rather than the kind of empowering model of, okay, right, these are situations that might be triggering for me, or this is something in the past that may have been a destabilizer, or in that moment, right, gosh, look what's happening to my body. We're not great at being in the now, are we?
We're not.
To notice what's happening.
And my own experience of that, if we are not taught how to do that, but also what's really going on when we're self-harming. So when I've explained it to teenagers in this way, it's a relief. And I spent 40 plus years carrying that shame around with me that I had self-harmed. And I didn't really realise that was there until I was starting to do this work, and it was going slowly. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? And I actually realised then, do I want to talk about the fact I self-harmed? Not really, because it's such a strange thing to do. Why would someone do that? But when you look at why would someone would do that, it makes complete sense. I'm not ashamed at all now. I can talk about it so openly, and I don't want this huge number of young people that are dealing with it now to have to carry that around with them for the rest of their life. And they won't even know they're carrying that around because we bury it. So let's not do that. Let's take the shame out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And because there still is so much shame and stigma around self-harming, as you say. I always bring this in quite a lot, but Brits, we're still not great at having conversations around emotions in general, or even maybe saying when we're not doing okay, the old kind of keep calm, carry on mentality. And that's kind of one of the reasons behind this podcast, is kind of getting people talking about this stuff. The kind of word normalizing isn't always everyone's cup of tea, but making these conversations less scary. And today, I'm just thinking, people listening now, whether you're on a train, at home, whatever, and you're in your office, is just how compassionate the conversations be. You know, it's a sensitive topic. There are risk issues associated with it, but it is something that we can talk about and comfortably talk about, and hopefully people can then start their journey of maybe having more conversations in general about it, as well as maybe someone that you've noticed, whether you're a parent, family friend, whatever.
My background is zoology, so I bring that in to the training that I run. I look at as humans, we've existed for 200,000 years as we are now biologically. So that's a long time. Our biology hasn't changed. We were designed for a world very different to today. So the internet, for example, has been around for 30 years, right? Out of that 200,000. And we are still in a body that's designed to live very different hunter-gatherer type lifestyle.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And so no wonder young people are struggling. When you look at the world they're living in, it's vastly, vastly different to what we've been designed for.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
there are solutions, but also emotions. They're a fundamental part of the human experience. They're really important, and each one performs a different role. And this is something I share as well in the training. So take fear and anger. That enables us to react to threats and danger. So people feel so ashamed when they're an angry person. There's a lot of teenagers who are made to feel like they're too angry.
Such a good point.
Anger is there for a reason. Anxiety is there to help us avoid harm.
Yes.
Love, compassion, empathy, they are there to help us connect with others. Guilt and shame, they are there to help us fit in with like the social norms. So they all perform a role, but we're not conscious of that. We just experience them in the moment and don't like them, a lot of them. So I think our whole relationship with emotions needs to change.
I could almost do a whole podcast episode on that, actually, because I always say one of the things I always find in my own kind of clinical work is anger gets a rough ride, doesn't it, compared with other emotions, because of the behavioural associations with it. And people shouldn't think, therefore, that they have it or feel it or that they should express it. It's just that there are different ways we can express it that might not mean so much risk or getting arrested or whatever else. But anger is so, absolutely. And that, you know, again, when we come back to social media, the world we're in, again, if we're growing up with images of people saying, the whole, I was brought up in the era in the 80s at school of, don't cry, stop crying, what you're crying for, kind of invalidating, minimizing, shaming at times. So then you kind of then learn, oh, is it okay to have these emotions? And for some people, they've never even been supported to know what those emotions are. I work with adults who don't actually know whether it's anger showing up, anxiety, shame, because they've never been supported to know what they feel, to name it, to be okay with it and have support. So that in itself, I just think is so, so important, because you're kind of marrying up there the rise of social media. Mm-hmm. So when I was at school, there was no social media because I'm such a dinosaur. But, there were a few children that I was aware of that self-harmed. But when we look at the increase in the stats and almost the perfect storm, really, of the pandemic, children being isolated at homes, quite often in bedrooms, which, as a teenager, you do tend to retreat. You need your space, absolutely, as you say. On social media, looking at things on Netflix, whether it is societal norms of how you're supposed to be, it's incredible, really, when you think about it, isn't it?
So those core human needs that we all have to survive and thrive, emotional safety is a massive one. And when we were young, we didn't know what was going on in every part of the world within minutes, did we?
Absolutely.
That's part of this rise in anxiety, that they haven't got that emotional safety that we need to just be in the moment and being ourselves. And
absolutely. And it's such, because these are all things for parents to kind of think about as well, because I take a really preventative approach to kind of well-being and emotional health, that if when we're coming back to parenting, there's a couple of other episodes I've done a podcast on parenting as well. It's just looking, the amount of times your kids are on their phones, changes in behavior, your boundaries, all of these things are really important as well. And for kind of looking at young people who self-harm. Absolutely, they're going to want social media, they're going to want phones, they're going to want to connect with people, but there are also things that we can do to just put boundaries in and to help that, because that's something they're not able to do at that age, is to put those boundaries on how long they're on phones or in WhatsApp groups, or to get out of conversations if there's bullying, harassment, shaming or whatever happening in WhatsApp groups, forums, Snapchat, whatever it be. And I sometimes think as parents, I'm guilty of that. We sometimes try and avoid conflict with our teenagers, but we have to sometimes be able to lean into some of that tricky stuff, to have boundaries. Your phone stays downstairs. How long have you been in your bedroom? Getting that balance of the autonomy and the time out and the privacy versus engaging in life and keeping an eye on them.
And we also mustn't belittle some of the things they're going through. So these WhatsApp group things. So with those friendship issues and group type issues that can happen, we've just talked about the human evolution timeline. if we were excluded from the group thousands of years ago, it meant we didn't survive.
Yes.
And that's how our nervous system experiences friendship issues. So when young people are really struggling and parents are thinking they're way overreacting, but biologically, that's what's going on.
Absolutely. So again, it's understanding the human body and the relationship with the mind, isn't it? You know, and I'm sure I'm guilty of that as a parent. Oh, I'm sure it'll blow over. It'll be fine. But actually taking that time to kind of, validate, that must be hard. That sounds difficult.
My daughter's dyslexic, and I see it with her. Sometimes she gets some anxiety at school, and it's totally understandable because she spent so long in a classroom without knowing that she was dyslexic when she was small, trying to do something she couldn't do. So she made meaning out of that, but also it was really stressful for her. Yeah. So even now, sometimes she'll get exactly that same stress reaction. Now she's older. This is how trauma works, right? The early experience gets repeated if you're in a similar situation, but she now knows what to do. So she will go out of the classroom. She knows what's happening. She knows it's her nervous system. She's got some tools. It doesn't stop it from happening, but the recovery is a lot quicker. But also, she doesn't have to be scared and ashamed of it. It is what it is.
And I love that, actually, because I think actually maybe just having that little bit of, that kind of, it's me. Am I not coping? Am I the one that's different here? Especially if you're in a classroom with other children. But I think that's actually really compassionate, isn't it? And provides a nice degree of separation of this is what is happening to my body right now. Kind of removes a bit of the blame and shame stuff as well, doesn't it? But also how wonderfully empowering to go, this is what I need. And I know it's really wonderful now. A lot of schools have much better kind of time out rooms, reflection rooms, places that you can go. And there's a lot, I know certainly in my son's secondary school is absolutely fantastic in the way that you're able to excuse yourself. There's no having to have permission and being shamed if you ask. It's wonderful. So it gives people so much autonomy of knowing when they need to go and just sit, reset, whatever it is that they might need. If there are people listening now, if say you're working with someone or a parent, whatever capacity, and you have noticed some behavioural changes, is there a kind of a first way in, that kind of, what might it look like if there is such a kind of a magic formula to begin to have a conversation? I know we've touched a little bit on some of the things that can come in, but I'm just thinking if someone's there going, actually, listen to this podcast and I am a bit worried about X or Y, whether it's your child or someone you're working with, is there anything around the kind of timing, the when and where, those first couple of words?
I'd say that going gentle and the privacy thing is very important.
Yeah.
Starting the conversation when they're in a good place, not when they've. Yes. So when when our nervous system is dysregulated or we are triggered, we've gone into what's called our survival brain at that point. Rational thinking goes offline. We're in survival and we can't think clearly. And I know what that feels like even now as an adult. So that's not the time to have the conversation at all. It's when you're both calm. And then I don't think people should be scared to mention this topic because all young people are aware of it. I don't think you will find many young people that are not aware of it. So you could even ask, do you hear about this at school? You don't even have to make it personal. You could open the conversation or just, focus on how are you doing? You don't have to mention self-harm. It's really kind of depends on that relationship.
Do you know what I really love about what you said there then is sometimes people, and this could be a conversation, about working with anybody who's you're worried about their well-being or something that's happened, whether it's suicide risk, whatever, is that sometimes people fear starting because they worry they're going to get it wrong. And I know when we had Rose on from the start of the conversation, that was something really, really important that came across in the podcast is, that it's important to start the conversation, just notice how we may overthink how it's going to go. And I love the fact that you said this. Have you talked about this at school? They might even need to use the word, just making it really simple. And I think actually that is something people can take away right now, isn't it? That you don't have to have this whole speech prepared or a whole plan of action, just compassionate words and the timing. You don't have to rush in and do it straight away. It's just, finding that space, that time, knowing when as well, just the geography from what you're saying as well.
Yeah.
You know, choosing somewhere where there's that privacy, just being aware of other people, shaming issues. I'm really going to take away from today, particularly what you said about just how little most people know about how our bodies work. It's quite astounding, really, isn't it? For the young people, but also those that are supporting them.
Yes, it is astounding that self-awareness that we can have, so that our reactions are not in control of us. We actually know what's going on, what they are, where they came from. This isn't stuff you can do overnight. I did 6 years of therapy with the same person every single week. You do not need to do that much, but that's why I went really quite deep on some of this stuff, and then did a lot of transformational type work. I've trained in a technique called havening technique, which is it uses touch to regulate the nervous system. And that taught me a lot about how the brain works. But to be able to see our life and our reactions and even the situations we are creating through that lens, without any shame and with total acceptance, it's so empowering. It changes everything, really. And we're lucky now. There's so much on social media. There are so many books, so many different places to start. If someone wants to start, they will find something that will speak to them quite easily if they just go out and look. So I never, suggest anything specific, because I think that journey is different for everyone.
And that's what I love as well, finding that fit then of what works for you, what approach is needed for you, that it's not a one size fits all. And again, just dispelling myths about. So if we kind of come on to kind of working with self-harm, because I do worry that sometimes that might put off people seeking help, because there may be fear around what that can look like, being stigmatized, some things that we're kind of hit with in the media around kind of mental health. That, if there's a young person listening to this, if there's someone supporting somebody, a parent, what can it look like? As you say, if I'm starting off looking at what's out there that's accessible, the kind of self-help, but what could it look like for somebody?
Again, I think it's very personal to each person. I would say to take the focus off the self-harm, but first of all, definitely top of the list is the first aid and avoiding scarring. So it's a sensitive and tricky conversation, but for a parent to even talk about how are you doing it, and can we look at that? That is a very difficult conversation, but I think one of the most important things. So it's not about we're going to stop this now. It's about we're going to find you the support that you need, and in the meantime, can we talk about? And they might say, no, I'm not talking about that, and then don't force it. But I think parents also need to be getting support for themselves at this point.
I was just going to ask that, actually.
So, and again, that's different for everyone. As you know, therapy, somatic work, there's a lot more of that going on now. So I think young people, I don't know if you've done any episodes of this, but as a young person, I struggled a bit with talking therapy. I did eventually find someone where it worked, but my early experiences weren't great, because it felt like a lot of pressure. But there's all sorts of different things we can do now that don't need to.
And that's okay.
Yes.
That it's not a next step down. And that's one of the things I kind of think is really important, to kind of dispel these myths of what it should look like. It's about a person-centered approach. But what I also love, the parents listening to this and thinking, okay, right, I need to have a conversation, to just know and have that permission. It doesn't have to all be done in that one conversation, and you might be met with, no, not at the moment, but what you're providing for that young person by even saying, let's just start this conversation, that I know and I'm here. And as you said, that emotional safety is really important. So I was thinking, as a parent, you might think, I didn't manage to finish the conversation, or it didn't go as I planned. But knowing then that it's about being able to start.
Safety is everything. Safety is the antidote to emotional dysregulation. So if that safety looks like sitting on a sofa, watching a movie and eating chocolate, that's fine. Like get the safety as well as the conversation going.
Yeah.
And parents need that too. How many parents themselves feel anxious and unsafe? So this applies to all of us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking as well, because I'm, that generation that, if there was something that needed to be spoke about in the family, you kind of sat around the kitchen table, very formal, right, we need to talk about this thing or this school report or whatever it was. And that immediately kind of, doesn't it, kind of makes you can sometimes have quite a visceral reaction to that. And what I really love now is, we always say having a conversation, you're better when you're not direct with someone, you're side by side, maybe on a walk, sitting on the sofa. But what I love about that kind of sofa model is that, if you're physically connected as well or sat side by side, that comfort, there's so many other things falling into place there. Familiarity,
And get advice. There's so much advice out there now. And a lot of what I share is easily found. The part that is different is that where I share the science and my personal experience, that's not easily found out there. But the rest of it, how to spot the signs and how to have conversations, it's out there. Talk to your GP, and sadly self-harm doesn't come up very high on the list of priorities really there. I mean, not a GP, I maybe shouldn't say that, but with the pressures,
I think it's important to say, tricky as it is,
but that will depend on the severity of the situation. You can get advice from your school. I mean, schools are booking me to run training for them, so they all want to understand this even more, and they do have
Which is great to hear. Yeah,
I'm really reassured when I go in. They're doing the right things. As much as we understand what the right things are, and I think this is where I think we need to understand a lot more. And that's what is not so out there at the moment. So
but things like this are starting the conversations, the work that you're doing, going into schools. I'm just thinking all the amazing stuff that must happen for teachers, just having somewhere safe to kind of work through their understanding of it, to then support.
They're scared to do the wrong thing. And, residential schools particularly.
Yes, of course,
So as well, though, this thing about confidentiality. So if you're going to talk to someone else about
good point.
Be very careful that you do that in a way that the young person is aware of, because otherwise you're going to break the trust. So transparency is important here. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to have their blessing and they say, yes, that's fine, but try and keep that trust and that door open. I think it's really important.
So there's kind of things like there's kind of kind words that we do need to involve someone else here. I'll let you know what that's going to look like, or and again, those are the kind of conversations that we might then try and avoid. But that it's just sometimes you don't have to overthink it. Very gentle, compassionate language.
There's mixed messages out there. So in some areas, social services advise to remove anything from the house that could be used, and in other areas that's strongly not advised, because teenagers are teenagers. They will find a way, and you might push them to find a way that's worse.
Absolutely.
I definitely don't advise remove everything, including because I've heard stories from parents of what happened when they did that.
And isn't it interesting that we even have that situation that, in a topic that's difficult enough, have that inconsistency in messaging when you're trying to navigate this as a parent with your own emotions and your own thoughts around what's happening. So in terms of, you go.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that then parents being criticised and blamed for not following that advice when their own intuition tells them that's not the right thing to do. It's tricky. There needs to be more consistency.
There's another whole podcast there in itself. Some lobbying maybe to be done there at some point. So in terms of the work that you do, if people they're going to want to, where do people find you and the work that you do and what you offer? Where do you hang out?
I have a website, lovelymessyhumans.com. It's evolving all the time, because this work I'm doing has come from listening to what's needed and then listening to what helps people.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
So I started slow, and it's evolving, and listening to young people and getting their feedback. They've fed in, and mental health professionals have looked at it, and so it's changing all the time. So that's the website, and I run a webinar for parents online I work with Rose from Start the Conversation, and we run a webinar for professionals as well. It's like the entry level, a bit of an introduction to self from this perspective that we've talked about today. But we actually get a lot of
you two work together,
into that, like counsellors and people, because this is a bit of a niche topic.
It is.
And we, you know, the theatre schools and the youth charities and all sorts of people coming to that. So, but also bespoke training. I can come in and train schools. So I've trained entire staff on inset days and the teams who look after boarders in boarding schools. And
so that real fit, because again, it may show up differently in different sections of society, or they may be noticing commonalities, I'm guessing, in terms of what they're seeing. Which I just, so if people aren't familiar, Rose from Start the Conversation, she has previously been on an episode as well. So if you scroll back a few months, you will find that episode, because I think we were saying earlier, actually these episodes need to almost be listened back to back, really. I might try and promote them on social media together. That kind of, because I think the work that you do, and what I love again is it's not a one size fits all training, is it? The work that you do, I love that it's kind of bottom up and top down. You know, it's theory and research driven. You've had mental health professionals look at it, but it's from the ground in terms of what people are experiencing, which we need to do more of, don't we? That really fits.
And in terms of what I experienced and what I needed at the time that I didn't get. So I'm not a mental health professional. I haven't done a psychology degree. I've come at it from
you don't need to
the other end, and that's where I had to go slow, because it was kind of scary as well, but it puts it on a different level in a way.
Absolutely. And so it's so refreshing, and I always think what we should never be doing is kind of coming in with anything and saying this is what you need. It's what do you need, let's provide space, let's hear. Are more effective that way as well, isn't it? I always ask every guest, I could chat to you all day. We almost could do 2 episodes on this. It's almost too much for one, isn't there? If you're happy to come on at another time and we can follow some of these threads again, because I just talking about kind of helping people understand the nervous system. Maybe we could do another whole episode on, you know, a little, like a mini series within the podcast might be a new turning point. Is if you've given us so many, but if there was one particular adversity takeaway, one little nugget you could leave us with, what might that be?
Around the topic of self-harm, be calm, don't panic. It doesn't have to be a big scary panic. It's about knowing that young people are struggling, they found something that's helping them, and there are other things that they could replace that with. So stay calm and go gentle.
So poignant. So I'm just hoping people that have listened to this, that going in with compassion, just trying to catch that fear and that need to stop and risk assess, and just giving it time and space. That's what I'm going to take away from this as well. Beth, it's been amazing. I know you've bared with me this year because I've been on and off with recording, so thank you so much. I'm so glad I managed to get you on and that you stuck with me. Is there anything else in terms of socials or anything else that would be useful for us to put in the show notes, as well as your website?
I have an Instagram account. It's just getting started. All of this is going to grow. It's very early days.
Well, if we put your Instagram in the show notes, and then we say to everyone, just go follow Beth.
And just reach out for a conversation. I am getting a lot of requests to work with young people, so I'm looking at that. I can't work with every young person.
Yes, I was going to say that.
How do I get this information to them in a way that works for them? So I'm working on that. But if anyone has views on that, I'd love to hear.
Link with Beth. Brilliant. And that's one of the lovely things about show notes, and people just click, get in contact. And one of the lovely things about this podcast is people seem to stay in touch and kind of help each other out with various things, so that's quite nice. And we've got our little neck of the woods, kind of Brighton, Sussex, little group of people now that's growing, so that's always really wonderful as well for sharing contacts and advice and things as well. Beth, thank you so much. It's been absolutely pleasure having you on, and thank you for helping us really deconstruct and understand a really tricky topic that we all need to be thinking about and talking about more. So I can't think of a better way for us to start to do that than talking to you first and taking it from there. So thank you.
It's a difficult topic. I think eventually we even probably need to move away from this term self-harm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's record another episode. Let's have a think of some ideas. We could almost do like a mini series on. I think that may be the way to go with this podcast, because I've done that with sleep before. I've had 3 episodes with one of my colleagues that went together, and that went down really well. So maybe that's something we can think about if you're up for it. I won't put you on the pressure on camera to do that. Thank you so much for coming on there. Thank you.
Bye.